Oh wait, close some real estate here. Wait, get this over here. I'm ready. We letting
You're
them in?
ready. What? It's too late. We're here already.
We're here already?
We're
Oh,
here.
all right. Well, Merry
No,
Christmas,
no
everyone.
choice. Happy holidays, everybody, and welcome to our last Eye on ESI for 2024. I can't believe it's going into 2025 already. It's zoomed past as we're on Zoom. We've got a great Eye on ESI to end the year. We've got some great things that we're going to tell you about for January and February, and we're looking forward to it. So I am Maribel Rivera. I am Vice President of Strategy and Client Engagement at ACEDS. I am joined today by Mike Quartararo, our President, and Jared Coseglia, founder and CEO of True Staffing. If you've never been here before, this is interactive, but we go fast, so got to stay on top. If you've got questions, throw them in the chat, throw them in the Q&A. We're going to ask them. We want to hear from you. We don't want to be talking heads. We want to hear your feedback. We want to hear your comments, what you're seeing. We want to know what trends you've got going on, what you're seeing as far as jobs in the market, and what you're experiencing as well. So, Jared, you ready to kick us off?
Let's do it. So we always like to start with our top 5 hottest jobs, and we usually pick a nice mix to show you what we think is trending in the industry. And I think what we show here is that there's diversity. We've got senior executive level jobs, there's forensics, there's e-discovery, there's lawyers, there's non-lawyers, there's managers, there's individual contributors. The e-discovery market is about to get extremely hot. The fourth quarter was our best quarter of the year. It's not even over yet. It's already been our best quarter of the year. A lot of that has to do with the volume of job opportunities accelerating and people hiring a little bit faster. We're going to cover the whole year's trends and a couple of topics on this 30-minute call. But this is what's hot right now. And I think it really shows you that there's opportunity for everybody in the market. And if you don't know Michael and Michelle, they're fabulous. Call them. All right, so I listed, guys, what I found as our biggest takeaways from 2024, and that'll lead us into what some of our predictions are for 2025. Since this is our year-end review, we thought we would kind of do something that's a bit more encapsulating of an entire year. And this first one is a remarkable trend. It's been 10 years since we've seen law firm hiring outpace e-discovery provider hiring. And this has been an undeniable trend for this year. A lot of it has to do with the adoption of Relativity 1 and people bringing work in-house. First, the technology licensing, followed by staffing, followed by scaling and accelerating growth. That's happening in law firms. It's happening in corporate a little bit. But reciprocally, the vendors ran really lean this year. And you'll see what the impacts of that running lean were in some of our other top takeaways, as that leanness does permeate through things like what motivated job seekers to come to market, where the jobs were, how many were remote, how many were contract, how many were full-time. We're going to share all that with you. So very interesting trend. Burnout was the #1 motivator for job seekers in e-discovery for 11 consecutive months. Money reclaimed the #1 slot in December. Actually, I think, yeah, in December. So until then, people were burnt out. And that speaks to the vendors running very lean and firms maybe potentially being understaffed and trying to figure out how to integrate this new cloud technology and what it has to offer into their process, into their budget, into their offerings for customers and end users.
Yeah, before we go too far down the list, I want to return to your top bullet first.
Yes, sir.
How much, I mean, you mentioned, Rel One and all and other things. How much do you attribute sort of the notion of firms are looking to, let's say, innovate and as relates to things like generative AI and stuff? How much does that weigh into that law firm hiring outpacing providers?
Yeah, I think it weighs in heavily from a long-term strategy, maybe not the most immediate impact from a like, what skills do I need to get these jobs? I think what you're seeing here are law firms being very keenly aware that they're only going to get access to air in Relativity through Rel 1. and they're not going to get it on-prem. And so they've got to change their models if they want access to that technology, or they've got to lean into their vendors' managed service agreements much more heavily in order to access that. And what we're also seeing is, and look, you know this, Mike and Maribel, because you guys have been in the industry longer than I have, the pendulum in e-discovery in terms of law firms having more of a dominance in hiring versus vendors sort of swings back and forth, regularly, every 4 to 5 years, give or take. There's no doubt that the vendors were outpacing law firms in terms of hiring pretty consistently for the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years, but very dramatically outpacing them in the last 5, almost 65 to 30% ratio, with the other 5% in corporate. We don't include government in those statistics. So yeah, I think it's about AI we know in a few years when this becomes the norm, we won't have access to it and we won't be able to profit on it. And what happens when that pricing model drops to the point where there's significant cost reduction or revenue generation potential in having access to these new and advanced tools?
So we have a question that piggybacks off of that. So thank you. How do you see the public sector adapting to these cloud-based e-discovery tools? Are they reluctant still? So I'm going to ask Mike first and see what Mike's thoughts are. And then Jared, you can build off of that.
I really think the attitude towards cloud-based tools has changed. Back in my law firm days, there was constant resistance to it. And I think that one, the pandemic helped, and two, the barriers have just been broken down. I think they were all security concerns back in the day. And I'm talking 10 years ago, right? And before that. So today, I don't think it's as much. Look, at the end of the day, let Microsoft worry about security, right? Let Amazon worry about security. Outsource that, move that risk away from your firm and to a provider. And you'll find, I think more productivity in cloud-based solutions. Jared?
I look at it from a slightly different perspective, because when I hear the word government, the thing to me that separates most government opportunities from all other opportunities is the demand that they be physically in an office pretty much all the time. The upside being that you're not taking your phone or your laptop home with you, and that's part of their security protocol. So while they might be moving to the cloud in terms of their technology, they're certainly not moving to the cloud in terms of their talent. And that's very reciprocal to how the vendors and the consulting firms are approaching things 180 degrees, and the law firms are somewhere in the middle. And since the law firms have done most of the hiring, we're also going to see a lot more jobs being hybrid in the market in 2024, which we'll get to in a second, than we are going to see fully remote. Because most vendors are hiring fully remote and most law firms are hiring hybrid 2 to 3 days a week in an office. Most corporations are either fully remote contract or 100%, 3 to 5 days a week in an office. And government agencies are typically 5 days a week in an office, sometimes 4. People that are getting flex on that are generally not individual contributors, right? They're usually middle management or above. So that has a bigger impact, right? They have a harder time getting talent, because if they got to come into an office, they're looking at an infinitely more finite group of people, even more infinite than they were before the pandemic, because people that used to have to come into an office to get employment are now getting jobs that allow them to be remote from employers all over the world, all over the country. So what's available in terms of localized talent when you have an in-office requirement is even more finite than it was before the pandemic, not the other way around. So that's sort of also a misnomer that employers have sort of needed to adapt to in order to figure out how to staff their businesses.
All right, this third bullet point, is that a change?
It's a big change.
I feel like it goes back and forth too.
It does go back and forth, and we'll show you both month over month and also year over year in a second. They were focused on full-time hires for a couple of reasons, right? And not contract augmentation. One is because I don't think they had as many big surges in litigation that they didn't have the bandwidth for, right? They had talent. They were slowly shaving talent off potentially in 23 when we thought we'd go into recession. They were waiting for things to get busier. Litigation did not get busier in 23 and 24 than it was in 21 and 22. We also were just coming out of the Great Recession. So a lot of people, we think half to 2/3 of people changed jobs in 21 and 22. So that sort of stabilized. And so people weren't, looking to do a lot of hiring. And when they were surging in business, they were pushing that work, see bullet point number 2, onto their existing employees rather than adding staff contract to come and alleviate some of that pain. It's remarkable, though, how much focus was on full-time hiring and how quickly that has shifted in the fourth quarter, right? We're actually seeing trends work on about a 2-year cycle. So if you look at Q4 of 2020, when the job market rebounded aggressively and so did the stock market, if you look at the fourth quarter of 2022, where the NASDAQ crashed, the job market crashed, Zuckerberg laid off 10,000 people. We all thought we'd go into recession in early 23. That didn't happen. And here we are literally 2 years later in October, November, December of 2024, and everything's rebounding back. So this is the new world we live in. It doesn't take 10 years for the economy to switch perspectives. It takes 2. And that is a post-pandemic result, effect, outcome. Yeah.
Outcome. I would say outcome.
Executive opportunities are scarce. They were scarce in 2024. Not a lot of leadership opportunity out there, and the leadership opportunity out there generally is very competitive, very competitive.
And we were talking about that, Jared. They're just staying put, right? There's no other real explanation. People at that level are just holding tight.
They are staying put. There's not a lot of new opportunity because people are leaving, and a lot of times people are leaving and not being replaced, or they're promoting from within to replace them. So there's not a lot of opportunity for people from the outside coming in. I also think a lot of focus is shifted maybe in the last 12 months away from, okay, we need to hire a new leader, to how are we training this new leader on all this new technology and what are they doing to sort of drive innovation and change within the firm. So there's been a much more collaborative focus on innovation at the top rather than a retooling at the top. That retooling will come when we see different levels of adoption of new technology and processes and pricing and wins and losses based on those adoptions over the next several years. And that'll take years for us to see. 70% of the jobs were hybrid because of law firm and direct hire focus from the market. And 30% were fully remote, I think is that the next one, MT? We have one more? Yes, less than 30% of jobs were fully remote. And most of those fully remote jobs are contract, meaning there are not a lot of employers, the vendors weren't hiring a lot, that are completely fully remote. So when those opportunities come up, they are coveted, and those jobs fill infinitely faster than the hybrid or in-office jobs.
So we
They
have
pay more or less.
Yeah.
Say that again?
They pay more or less.
The remote jobs sometimes pay a little bit less, but that usually comes after twisting some arms on the customer side that they're going to have to pay more to get what they want to get people to commute into an office, particularly in the large cities like New York,
Gotcha.
Los Angeles, San
All right,
Francisco.
I think we got a question.
No one wants to commute. So question, and I think we're probably going to get to this as far as what we potentially will see in 2025, but there is a question: do we expect the hiring surge to continue throughout 2025? Things are going to continue to get better or stay put with solid budgets? And we touched on this a little bit on our last Eye on ESI last month, where we talked a little bit about deregulations. So Mike or Jared, you're.
I'm going to jump right in
Jared,
because I have a very specific perspective on this, right? And we're actually
Jared all day.
True's going to do a whole webinar at this at the end of January about the Trump administration and its impact on the job market, right? Specifically in the legal technology vertical. They're going to bring in a wave of deregulation. Deregulation historically always leads to more litigation because the risk for corporations shifts from, okay, are we going to get fined by regulators? Are we going to have to deal with all these new compliance laws being passed, and how are we going to operationalize that and prepare for it legally, which will not be what people are worried about. Clearly, they're not worried about it. If you saw the CNBC talk with, they had Google CEO and Bezos was there. They're all talking about the leash is off. We're going to be able to like do things with AI and not worry about compliance in a way that should allow us to generate more revenue and scale the American economy to outpace the debt we are incurring. If we can grow faster than we are incurring debt, interest rates will remain dropping instead of increasing. Trump puts in tariffs, it won't matter because the increase in GDP far outweighs that of debt, far outweighs the cost of inflation based on tariffs, and we all go riding into the sunset making a ton of money. That's the dream.
Who knew you came to Ion ESI for an economics lesson?
We do it all here.
You know, look, economics drives the job market, right?
Of
And so,
course,
like,
of
if this
course. I
happens,
mean,
and everybody's like, I'll be, look, I'll some Debbie down. I'm worried for my privacy programs. I'm worried. I'm worried for my compliance groups. They're not going to
yeah,
get the budget and headcount because they don't have
exactly.
pressure from this administration. I'm worried about them. I'm not worried about my ESI business. My ESI business is going to be on fire for the next 6 months, right? And it's been on fire for the last 2.5, which is a dramatic change to the experience we had in the first half of this year. The reason for that fire is because everyone's getting ready to sue each other. They're not going to be hellbound by compliance anymore. So they're going to pursue IP, patent, trademark, employment litigation. These are going to be hot, hot areas. And these are also areas where AI comes keenly into play, both in dealing with the matter and the subject matter itself in terms of ownership of intellectual property or data or how it's used or misused and what people are going to do to sue each other, as opposed to waiting for regulators to scare everybody into doing the right thing. So it's going to be good for our business. And I also think you're going to see a tremendous amount of mergers and acquisitions, which we haven't seen in 2 years. I mean, if you go back and look at 21 and 22, is like insane, right? We had Airbnb, and I think the only real big one in the last year or two was Reddit. I mean, we just haven't seen a lot of IPOs. We haven't seen a lot of big, massive M&As. And when we do, we will also see lots of litigation related to all of that, and investigation and second requests. All of this is good for ediscovery.
So comment in the chat. So avoid governance and privacy, data privacy roles. I wouldn't say avoid governance.
No,
Depends
no.
what kind of
Yeah, I wouldn't
governance
say, I would
also.
say, no.
That's not what I said.
Information governance is going to be extremely still important as we continue, especially because of data readiness for Gen AI.
Correct.
Right? You've got to prepare your data.
Correct.
For
And
Gen
managing
AI
third parties, right, is going to be a huge component to this. Now, look, some privacy programs are now becoming bifurcated AI governance privacy programs, right?
Right.
That could be really good for them, because the AI gov piece may be the way that they're getting budget and headcount to serve both agendas, which are very much intertwined and intermingled. So in no way do I say avoid privacy jobs, but I will tell you that the advertising price ranges for AI gov jobs are lower by 5 to 40% than what most privacy people in those unilateral jobs are already making. So the market in AI governance has got to decide that that becomes more valuable in a Trump administration, which I believe they will, in corporate America, because it's going to drive business innovation. It's going to drive marketing opportunities. It's going to drive revenue growth, as opposed to drive risk against regulatory fines or drive risk against potential negative outcomes. The focus is going to be on how can we empower the business, not how do we keep the business from getting regulatory investigations.
But we also have to keep in mind, right, that that's going to impact American companies more, because European, right, we've got GDPR, we've got Brazil has its privacy laws, other countries have their privacy laws. So we still have to keep in mind that if you're a global organization, those things are still in place. And just because we're not doing it here in the US does not mean that Canada or Brazil or Latin America or anywhere else.
Right, but does that drive more innovation here in the United States because we're unencumbered potentially? And I'm not positioning myself as having a stance on the morality of this. Just speaking as a business professional, does that allow American businesses to potentially innovate, generate more revenue, do more in a deregulated environment? And I think most CEOs, particularly of big tech companies and banks, feel like this is going to be good for business. And what's good for business means they're going to hire more human beings. And hiring more human beings is good for all of us.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about our predictions. This kind of ties into everything we talked about. We're already seeing this happen. Contract job opportunities are going to skyrocket. Part of this, though, just so that the e-discovery community can acutely understand why this is different in e-discovery than it is in privacy. E-discovery contract jobs are generally going to be at service providers, consulting firms, corporations. The reason for that, particularly on the vendor consulting firm side of things, is because a lot of these companies are looking for an exit in the next 2 to 5 years. And as companies begin to look for an exit in the next 2 to 5 years, they become very wary of adding perpetual headcount that's full-time direct hire that they don't see perpetual revenue and work for. So if they've got a huge project, a huge second request that they know is going to last 6 months, the likelihood in this market that they're going to scale up with contractors and scale down is much greater than in years past, where they're just going to push the work onto FTEs and be done with it, because they're going to want to take more work to inflate that top line and bottom line revenue. They're going to want to use contractors to augment in order to keep costs low perpetually, right? And keep EBITDA scaling and growing, because that EBITDA over the next 2 years for a company looking for an exit is essential to their evaluation, to their valuation. And so that's part of the reason you're going to see contract skyrocketing. There are a lot of vendors that are going to go through M&A in the next few years, much more so than we've seen in the last two, much more akin to what we saw in 19, 20, 21, and 22. Adoption of AI and ESI is going to happen. And the trend here is that it's going to accelerate talent growth. And what do I mean when I say that? There's going to be opportunity for people to learn new skills that have not been valued before. Those skills, once they're valued and identified, will be leveraged for career mobility, promotions, raises, things that are compensation oriented. They're also going to create new roles that haven't existed before, and those roles are going to codify next year. So getting your hands on this stuff is really, really, really mission critical, particularly for attorneys involved in doc review. And I had a client just say to me 10 minutes before I got into this call, the funniest quote, he's like, "Yeah, Jared, I know it's crazy. We're asking you to hire a bunch of people for us to come in and wield AI," which is kind of, defeats the purpose, right? The AI shouldn't need the people, but it's the opposite. The AI desperately needs the people. And we're in a moment of time now where we're building those foundations where it needs people more than it might need them 5 years from now. So now's the time, people, to get your hands dirty and get involved in helping create those foundations, because those foundations will be the building blocks for the future for you and your employer.
So quick question for you on the adoption of AI. For those who are not technology savvy, right? I'm going to assume, and Mike and I have been saying this all year long, I've been saying it for probably 3 years, is learn AI, get some.
I mean, a lawyer who comes to me and says, "I'm in ediscovery and I'm not technology savvy, and I don't want to be," the call's over. Like, what are we talking about here? This is legal technology. This isn't legal. This is legal technology.
It's not even an oxymoron. I don't know what that is.
It's a non-starter. I'll just use my company as an example, guys. I'm going to get licenses for my company across the board for a number of AI products, a lot of which people are already using, but I'm moving to a point where we need to crowdsource this. This can't just be a top-down integration into the business for everybody. It's going to have to start being from the bottom up, and they're going to have to put the tool in the hands of more than just their leaders, because the leaders don't have the bandwidth to be the doers. They're not individual contributors, they're managers. We're going to now move into an ecosystem where individual contributors are necessary for the implementation of the ideas, right? We're ready to move past experimentation and into implementation as a community. And we're seeing hiring that now asks for these aptitudes, if not existing experiences, in order to qualify for new work.
We've got a question.
Yeah.
And I think this relates back to adoption of AI and e-discovery contracts. Does that include executive opportunities, or will that stay the same as in 2024 with people?
We'll get there. MT, you want to click one more time? One more time? There it is. Okay. Yeah, they're going to be scarce, guys. They're going to be scarce because nobody's moving around, and there aren't new jobs yet for them to move into. There will be soon, but there aren't right now. And that includes privacy. That includes cyber. That includes governance. I mean, there's not a lot of executive movement. People are focused more on training their executives and then getting their deputies trained and then figuring out how to backfill what they don't have the bandwidth for with contractors on the privacy and security side. And on the e-discovery side, they're just trying to figure out how to scale as things get much, much busier and they've hit, utilization at 120% on their entire staff, right? Whether it's a law firm or a vendor. I want to quickly go back to point number 3, and then we can take that. I see there's another question. The law firms and ALSPs are going to focus more on hiring attorneys, and I want to explain why, because it's not just because they think they're better for the job. No. Lawyers are going to get to bill at a different rate, particularly at law firms, if they're barred lawyers in the state that they're practicing, than somebody who's a JD that's not practicing, that's not barred. They're just going to get to bill at a much higher rate. And as AI creates efficiencies and as corporations put pressure on outside counsel to not bill them for certain things that they feel like they should have AI do this for them, right? Because we could do it. Why aren't you doing it? I'm not paying for that. You should have AI doing that, or charge me less for that. They will, however, pay a premium for people with AI skills who are lawyers that they simply feel like are not commoditized and are not about simply creating efficiencies, right? They're helping them manage legal matters as it relates to AI. And those lawyers, whether they're doing operational work or doing legal work, are going to be desired to be hired more because they can be billed back at a much higher rate during this amorphous, like, what's the value proposition of these people? And when we don't understand something, we pay more for it, generally speaking. So that's sort of what's happening here. And law firms in particular are looking for ways to say, how do we increase the hourly rate of certain skill sets as we get pressure to not bill or decrease the rate of other things that we are accustomed to billing for prior to the age of AI? Before we get to the legal operations stuff, I want to touch individual innovators will reshape. And I know we're going to run out of time. We probably should have booked an hour for our year end, but this is really important, right? We saw Robert Keeley, Rose Hunter-Jones, who's going to be a guest on our show in February of next year, make moves from very large law firms, Sidley Austin and King & Spalding, into incredibly rapidly growing boutiques, Redgrave and Hildreth Graben. And we're going to see individual innovators like Rose Jones start to reshape corporate legal buying habits, right? ESI attorneys who are strategic, who have integrated AI, who are subject matter experts, and now rainmakers are going to bring clients with them, guys. And I think this is what we all had hoped would happen in 08, 09. And we thought e-discovery practice groups would sort of separate from litigation and be their own thing. And we're starting to see that be real through the focal lens of individual contributors. And they're going to reshape their buying habits because they're going to be able to present solutions that are atypical to traditional human document review.
I have one quick question, and
Yes.
then let's chug through. Where do we see AI playing a role in the hiring resume review? And we've been seeing it, right? It's not AI. I think Gen AI is semi already been in the works for like a few years now. So any quick thoughts? I'll give you 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, in the hiring process, a lot of it is going to have to do with keyword search on your resume in terms of how employers are using AI to filter resumes. I mean, that's kind of basic. You'd be surprised how basic most of that is. I think what we're seeing maybe on a more innovative front is people actually using AI technology to conduct the interview as a first pass, saying you're going to talk to a robot or an AI and we're going to video record it before you actually talk to a human. We're starting to see more companies adopt this for a variety of very different reasons from place to place, but we're also seeing a lot of resistance to it from the job seeking community. I'm not going to be interviewed by a robot. I don't want my interview being recorded. How long are they going to keep the recording? Are they training my model? My video is being used to train an interview model. Are they using technology that analyzes my facial expressions to determine my level of confidence? Or are they just using a recording in order to be able to play back and get a text, dossier of the conversation? I mean, all of these things. And when we take some of these things back to our customers, the answers we often get is, we don't know. Let me look into that. And so when that's the answer, that starts dragging out the process. It slows things down. Now you're losing candidates because they don't want to interview. You're losing candidates because you're trying to figure out what your, standard language is going to be around what you do with all this data. So I don't know. I think there are pros and cons to how AI is used in the interview process. For me, its best implication is on identifying people that are qualified for positions, not measuring things that are much more ethereal and probably should have some human interaction. Let's not devalue one human's ability to judge the character of another's based on an intelligent conversation. That's tremendous value, right?
I never thought I'd hear anyone say keywords in resumes, but I got excited when you said it because it sounds so 2007, but it's true. If you're building a resume today, make sure you have the keywords corresponding to the role you're applying to.
Correct.
It's a simple, basic literary tool, if you will. And for any of the AIs that are searching resumes, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for a person, they're looking for keywords.
Correct.
Awesome. Quick question. Any opportunities for project managers with AI automation experience pivoting to e-discovery? I would say we've been screaming it for the last 2 years. yes, we need you to have AI automation experience. Project managers
But
are
look, it might be
always
contract,
welcome.
Maribel. They got to be open to contract because
Yeah.
this is still an experiment for most people. And most people are going to want to experiment using contract resources, right? Some people think it's the opposite, like, oh, they're going to pay me a ton of money because I can do these, but they don't know, they don't understand what you do most of the time. So you're going to have to go prove that value to an employer on the job, potentially.
But even for someone coming into ediscovery, going into a contract role as a project manager is a great place to start.
Sure, depending on what they want to be compensated. I think part of the problem with a lot of the AI and AI Gov and Gen AI contracts and or full-time jobs are they're paying 5 to 40% less than what the people who actually have the skills to do that job are already making because they don't know how to price it because they never hired for this before. And there is no, market. I mean, I can provide you our market intelligence, but it's based on advertised jobs. We're filling hundreds and hundreds of e-discovery jobs a year. We are not yet filling hundreds and hundreds of AI, Gen AI legal jobs a year. They just don't exist. I mean, we tracked 2,433 total posted AI Gov jobs all year on LinkedIn. That's not a lot. That's not a lot. There were 15,000 privacy jobs and like 11,000 e-discovery ones. So it's not a lot. It pales in comparison. I know we're out of time.
So, well, let's see if you've got a few more minutes. We'll give us 5 more minutes. Let me see those thumbs up or hearts or whatever. And Jared, I'll keep going right through. We've got some other stuff to announce at the end.
We'll just show you this data real quick here.
There we go. I think we've got 5 minutes.
Thank you,
Let's go,
everyone.
Jared.
We can move on to the next one because this is where the real changes have occurred. You see on the service provider side, MT, you can go ahead and animate this. There's been a lot of increase in salaries in the last 30 days. We've had employers coming back to us saying, repost your job. We want to go up in comp. We've had people say the ceiling of this job is 120 and then they paid 130. We've had people say offer 140 and then come up to 145 to get the deal done. We've had senior PMs in the 175 range at vendors now. I mean, we're seeing the market on the vendor side move up. It just has to. They've just been running too lean for too long. They've got to acquire talent. They got to lock them down. They got to do it quickly, right? Because they also know they may not get these people until mid-January as a start date because they're getting their year-end bonus. They're going to wait for that. They've got Christmas holidays, all these things, right? So salaries actually went up pretty meaningfully. And MT, would you just toggle for everybody back and forth so they could see the change here? Toggle back. Yeah, it was a pretty nice bump. So vendor salaries are starting to inch up on law firm salaries. If you're a law firm trying to hire a PM at 125, you are going to be very challenged, very challenged. The vendors have now exceeded your salaries by a good 10 to 15K. Okay, moving on. Here's contract versus direct hire. You could see that direct hire pretty much exceeded contracting for ESI through the whole year. If I showed you the privacy slide of this, it would literally be 180 degrees. It'd look almost opposite of this. But you could see towards the end of the year, pretty significant increase, September, October, November, we're at almost 50% of the marketplace right now. So we anticipate it's going to actually increase more into the first quarter. But we actually think full-time will increase proportionally to contract. Part of the reason why you saw such a surge in contracting is because contract jobs get filled so much faster. So we get a contract job, it's filled in 5 business days, sometimes less. And the full-time jobs take 30 to 90 days depending on the nature of the search. So you'll just see a big surge when everyone starts hiring contractors because they onboard a lot faster than a full-time resource, which is what happened in the fourth quarter of this year. Contract versus direct hire, this is year over year for the past 7 years. You could see that full-time is generally exceeded contracting with the exception of 2020. We think it's going to be pretty 50-50 for the next couple of years. We think companies are going to try to run lean when they can. In e-discovery, if you looked at my privacy chart, it'd be 70% contract, 30% full-time. Very different marketplace. Next slide. Remote hybrid. This is really indicative of law firms having the bulk of the jobs this year. You can see just how few jobs were fully remote. That's the dark blue line. Not a lot of jobs are 5 days a week, 4 days or more in an office anymore. Most are 3 to 2 days, sometimes 1, sometimes a couple of times a month. But you could see here that the increase towards the end of this year, 27, 30% in the last 2 months, is a direct result of more contract hiring. Contractors tend to be fully remote. Contracting hiring goes up, so do fully remote hiring. That's what you're seeing in this data. If we look year over year, I mean, this chart is just crazy to me. It just shows you what a turning point 2020 was. The market totally shifted in terms of remote versus in office. But you could also see here from 21, where 90% of the hybrid jobs were fully remote, to 22 and 88% were fully remote, then 65, and now this year only 26% were fully remote. It's a steep decline in our rebound from COVID in terms of permissions to work remotely from home. 2 to 3 is the new norm for most law firms, fully remote for vendors, fully remote for most contractors, but even a lot of those jobs have to be fully remote in the state that the company does business in, right? Motivations for ESI job seekers, totaling up end of the year, burnout, held the #1 spot for 11 consecutive months. Money was #2. Unemployment was #3. Boredom, lack of challenge, #4. And remote hybrid work, #5. My guess is we won't even see #5 on the chart next year. The market's sort of accepted that reality. We have a lot of job seekers that 12 months ago who are still looking today are giving up the ghost on finding something in their salary range that's 100% remote and are now showing a more willingness to come in 2 to 3 days a week. So
And we've seen actually boredom, lack of challenges actually move back and forth in that 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that's pretty much all of our wrap-up data. We're changing things up in the new year. Tell everybody, Maribel.
I am super excited for the new year, Jared, because we are going to make some changes. In January, we've got guests starting to join us. So we'll have Stephen Dooley from Sullivan and Cromwell joining us. We're going to talk a little bit about Gen AI and also talk about what we're seeing as far as hiring, right? This is Eye on ESI. It's all about job trends. So he's going to come in and join us. And then in February, we're going to have the amazing Rose Jones join us, who is newly at Hilgersgraben. And we'll probably talk a little bit about some of the things that Jared talked about earlier, right? Moving these teams, what they're looking for, corporate buyers, how we're going to start to look at that. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have a lot more in all of next year. You'll always have a guest speaker every month. And so if you can go to ACEDS, or you can scan the QR code here, go to our global calendar and make sure to sign up. If you've got questions, as always, after, please feel free to send them. Jared and his team, or Mike and I will be happy to answer all of those. Mike, any last thoughts?
Happy holidays, everybody. Thanks for making 24 the best it could be, and looking forward to an exciting 2025.
Awesome. And Jared, any thoughts from you? And then I'll
happy holidays, everybody. We appreciate everybody's patronage. Thanks for sticking with us. Join us again next year, please.
And for those who are new, we're so happy that you joined us. We hope that you enjoyed, and they'll be back next month, and that you share it and tell people to come join us if you think this is valuable. And also ACEDS is running our holiday sale through the end of the month, and we're celebrating our 15th anniversary next year.
So are we.
So True and ACEDS celebrating 15 years. You've got to join us all year long. So, and if you've got a story about ACEDS or True, please share it in LinkedIn or send us an email. We want to hear your stories so we can share them with the world. Thank you and happy holidays.